if all you do is put out fires, all you're doing is training arsonists. These people who are experiencing some kind of gap between their current health and whatever well-being means to them, engage with healthcare to meet that. And how they go on that journey together will dictate the outcomes. It'll dictate where they get to. One of the most challenging things in healthcare, you can't always change the outcome, but what they can contribute to is the experience of trust and dignity and growth along the way. Some of the most transformative outcomes is how something that didn't go so well is made right in a way that creates a whole better future.
Welcome to the Differentiation podcast. My name is Michèle Sorgaroli. I'm your host. And today we are being joined by Paul Larkin. Now, Paul works at the intersection of behavior, communication, and healthcare for both patients and clinicians, which is interesting. He brings experience in law, psychology, professional sport, and has a deeply personal story as the son of a refugee. And all of these help him reshape how clinicians and patients experience care together. He's now on a mission to equip every person in the healthcare system with both mindsets and skill sets that support their journey, because he believes that every single interaction in healthcare has the power to heal, and he's built his life's work around proving it. This is going to be fun, Paul. I'm looking forward to this. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Aw. So you've tempted us with a number of little cliffhangers here, talking about your story. And I know we've had a previous conversation. I know a little bit, but I'd love for you to start for us right back at the beginning. You know, you talked about a vast degree of experience, whether it's law, psychology, sport, and the son of a refugee. When did your journey really start to take shape? Take us back to the beginning.
I think like most good journeys, started long before I was aware of it. Um,
Mm.
my father was not a officially a refugee, but was an economic and refugee from Northern Ireland and left his he'd had family members killed in the troubles there.
Oh my gosh.
And so chose to come to New Zealand with his brothers as a way to have a fair go of things, but I think also for the kids that he planned on having,
Yeah,
not have to grow up with that. So it wasn't something that I was consciously, aware of every day
right.
until later on, when you start to see that the some of the some of that road ahead of you has been prepared, which is it's been an interesting thing to look back on.
Mm.
Um, and I think my journey, when I think about the first interaction I had where I started to think there's something in this intersection of how we think and behave and what we're doing, was interestingly right after my father died. And I was at law
Mm.
school at the time in New Zealand, and he had passed away suddenly right at the end of the university year.
Oh
And I
gosh.
hadn't enrolled in any papers for the next year because there wasn't something that was on my mind.
Hmm.
And when I decided I will go back, I had missed the boat on all the papers, and
Oh
it was
my
really
God.
competitive to get into papers at the best of times.
Hmm.
And so I went down to the old government buildings in Wellington, which is this beautiful old one of the first sort of wooden buildings built in New Zealand,
Oh wow.
um, and said to the
Gosh.
people at reception, "Hey, look, I'm in a bit of a pickle here. I can't get into any papers. They're all full." And this woman looked at me and said, "Oh, look, you could go and ask Ian." And I said, "Oh, no, who's Ian?" And she said, "Oh, Ian McDuff." And so Ian McDuff is this mercurial character who had been the dean of a couple of law schools, and most recently the dean of the Singapore Business University Law School. And he's a negotiation and alternative dispute resolution specialist,
Okay.
and has this amazing track record of working, in places like the Basque Country,
Wow.
with some of the peace process there.
And you
And
were
so
going off to negotiate with a negotiation expert.
yeah, yeah, and
Nice.
I think like all the best negotiations, we both wanted what was best.
Yeah.
And so I remember knocking on his door, and saying to him, look, this is what's happened. Someone suggested that you might accept me into your very restricted course of 12 odd students to get some points and to
Mm.
be able to participate. And I can't remember what he asked me or what we talked about too much, but he said, "Yeah, okay, let's do that." And we spent the first part of that course actually talking about communication, personality, behavior as the backdrop to any negotiation. Because if you understand
Mm.
those things, you are better enabled to manage
Mhm.
yourself, engage with others. And so that was really the first time that I realized that there was something more than just being proficient in passing law exams, I guess is the best way of putting it.
Mhm.
Yeah. And he was a particularly interesting guy to be able to have those conversations with.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Now, I get the impression that wasn't a class that you were planning to participate in because you didn't know who Ian was. So, what was it about that class? He said, "Sure, come and join me," or how did that work? I'm curious.
Well, partly it was the only option.
Okay.
Um,
Oh,
and
isn't
I
that
did know
funny?
who I did know who he was. He had taught a small block in the very first year of law school. So you've got all these
Okay.
really young students who are really enthusiastic, and then they meet this really interesting person who comes in quite charismatically for part of a trimester.
Oh,
But I hadn't really thought about him too much since then.
yeah.
Um, and I really had no other options. I think there were maybe two papers. There was that
Okay.
one, other one they managed to sort of shoehorn me into, but he welcomed me in, and it was the smallest paper that I'd ever been in. You go from really big, busy papers to
Hmm.
people who can explore and converse and negotiate together.
Right. So very, very intimate. How was that experience for you, especially on the heels of your father having passed and being in a, a program that was really bringing forward personality and behavior and all that type of thing that maybe wasn't necessarily as pronounced on your radar prior to then?
It's something that I think at the time I was surprised by it. I was surprised
Oh.
to hear um, someone who was known as a technically masterful negotiator to say, before we do that, let's talk about what's kind of really going on here.
Mm.
Um, and it was probably the one of the earliest seeds of starting to healthily think about negotiation. Because it's all negotiation, really, like all our communication, we're negotiating with ourselves
Oh.
uh, all the time in all sorts of little ways.
Hmm. Interesting. So, how did you go from law to walk us through your journey? Because you ended up in healthcare working with clinicians and patients and that kind of thing. So, I'm curious about that journey. Can you share with us the path?
I can. It was a journey characterized by some chance meetings, just like with Ian.
Mm.
Um, I had grown up in a place in New Zealand called Rotorua, which is a little bit like parts of Canada. It was one of the very early places where mountain biking became a thing.
Okay.
So I'd grown up riding bikes and went to law school because I had been good at English and arts subjects at school, and people said you should go to law school. Um, and
Okay.
I think particularly for mum and dad coming from a place where any kind of vocational career, aside from actually into the clergy, when I think about it now, was barred for Irish Catholics. It was very hard to become a lawyer or to go through school and succeed. And so I think mum and dad particularly liked being able to say Paul will be a lawyer or Paul's a lawyer. And
Mm. Hmm.
it didn't dawn on me until my first day as a lawyer that the drudgery of documentation and working as a young lawyer is very different from what I had expected, and I
Mm.
enjoyed it. But there was a chance meeting. That firm was a fairly forward-thinking law firm in New Zealand at the time, and they called me. This was a chance meeting. I'd met a partner as I was walking one of my nephews home, and he'd said, "Oh, we got talking," and he said, "Oh, I've seen you around. What's your story?" And I told him, and he said, "Oh, do you want to come and talk to us about a job?" He said, "You sound like maybe you would fit with something that we're thinking about doing." Um, and just prior to that, I had been working for professional cycling teams.
Or
So,
sorry, repeat that.
for professional cycling teams, for
Okay. Mm-hmm.
started off managing the New Zealand mountain bike team, which
Okay.
was 100 odd people.
Mm-hmm.
And this was again just after my father had died. I had broken my back 3 times by this point through
Mm.
school and had some pretty significant fractures, so I couldn't ride bikes very well anymore. And thought I'll stay involved with sport by doing what I can, hanging out with people who are friends of mine, supporting them, and that had escalated. There was a couple of pivotal moments. There was a really significant event at a international tour where things got complicated like they always do. Tempers were flaring, and I had to, or chose to enter that situation and figure it out in a way that worked for everyone. And someone had been watching that, and I got a call the next week from the National Federation saying, "Can you? We've got a similar issue. Would you like to come and manage the New Zealand team?" So I think the second time I went home to Rotorua after my father died was actually as one of the managers of the New Zealand cycling team, which was a
Mm-hmm.
interesting homecoming.
Mm.
Um,
And were you still practicing law at that time as well?
I was just about to start practicing law,
Okay. Okay.
and when I started practicing law, I think I had a foot in the I would prefer to be working in sport still camp.
Okay.
Um, but the firm called and they said, "Would you like to come in early before you are officially slated to start? We're doing some training." And I said, "Yeah, sure, I'd love to come along." And I go to a convention center for some training with all of the solicitors from the firm. And a guy by the name of Werner Neff walks into the room and says, "Hi, I'm here for the next 3 days, and we're going to be training together, talking about communication, motivation, personality, conflict."
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And Werner had been the head of pilot training for the Swiss Air Force, was one of the really pivotal characters in aviation globally that led to a lot of the safety reforms around human factors.
Uh,
And I walked out of that 3 days thinking this is actually what I thought law was going to be, a chance to make sense of things and improve relationships and outcomes um, with a way to see things a bit differently. It was
yeah.
really surprising. It was not what I expected at all. And
Hmm.
that was one of those chance meetings. So
Mm-hmm.
Werner and I are friends now. He's been doing what he's doing for probably close to 60 years, and still has this incredible impact globally. And so I remember that was just someone I met. I thought this would be an interesting person to stay in touch with.
Yeah.
So he helped to train me some years later.
Oh my gosh. So,
Yeah.
yeah, that's an interesting piece. This is the first time that you've talked about safety reforms, and that piece in your
Yes.
journey. It's the first time it really started to surface. There was sport, and then it was, of course, there was law, and there's some of that, but you hadn't talked about safety yet. So, what was it about that? You talked about relationships and you talked about improving outcomes, but you introduced it as safety reforms. I'm curious about what it was about that that stood out for you.
I think what stood out to me was this understanding that most of the time when things go wrong in aviation, it's not a technical issue. It's very
Mm,
rarely that you have a technical issue on a plane. It's generally the result of stress, relationships, communication, all failing at the same time on this,
yeah.
in a risky situation, which is a lot
Okay.
like in healthcare now. You've got these technically amazingly skilled people who really want to do a good job and consistently do amazing jobs. But if you have a few unlucky dominoes intersect, at the same time. The odds of that are small, but the consequences are much like when a plane doesn't land safely.
Interesting. Now, you had already broken your back 3 times, you said at this point. Is that
Yes.
right? We kind of skipped over that. So, what influence did that have on any of up to this point in your journey, having had that
Um,
experience? That sounds intense as a young man.
yes, it was. The peculiarity there was that I'd broken it 3 times, but it had been missed twice. So I had about 12 fractures across 5 vertebrae in my lower back, and I was at a boarding school at the time in New Zealand that was not a fancy boarding school. It was a fairly average boarding school, but it had a big rugby program,
Okay.
and it was important to them that everyone played rugby. And I had broken my back in a mountain bike accident where it was in hindsight quite clear that the that's what had happened,
Oh
but the
my
school
gosh.
doctor had actually retired and was not supposed to be practicing anymore.
Oh my
Um,
gosh.
and so he missed it. And the next year, I played. The school had said, "You're playing rugby," and I said, "I don't think that's a good idea." I couldn't lift my right leg off the ground for 6 months last year, um, and was more or less coerced into doing that, and broke it again. And so
And you were
I
what, 17 at this age or 16?
think
You
it
were
was
young.
16 the first time, yeah, 16 or
Good heavens.
yeah, early 16s.
Mm-hmm.
And then some years later had a mountain bike accident where I had started to sort of be able to do things a bit more. I was probably 21, and the doctor at that point had interestingly also missed it. And I was leaving the hospital, and a nurse stopped me, and she said, "Hey, like, are you okay?" This was a really busy hospital. It was the emergency center there, and she stopped me and said, are you okay?" And I remember I was on crutches and sort of nearly breaking down and saying to her, "No, I don't think I'm okay." And she said, "You look worse than when you came in." And it was this really interesting thing where she had obviously seen me when I'd come in, and amongst all the other people that she was tracking, there was nothing special about me. That
Mm-hmm.
was just something special about her, I'd
Mm-hmm.
say, tracking those people.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and she noticed I looked worse, and she said, "Just stand here for a bit. I'm going to go and find the doctor and get him to look at the X-rays again." And someone came back to me and said, don't move."
Oh my goodness.
We just had a second look, and that was again actually an instance where the person reviewing those X-rays was really busy that day. Um, there were a whole lot of factors that made it more complicated for them to slow down and look at those X-rays. But when they came back with a different mindset, they realised that there was something there they'd missed. So that meant that really for close to 2 years, I couldn't ride a bike.
Mm-hmm.
Would do a lot of things. Um, so it definitely contributed to my journey. I think I would have been a pretty average cyclist, but it turned out I was actually pretty comfortable and happy being a manager and helping other athletes. So in some ways, it worked out pretty well.
Oh, interesting. That's a silver lining, isn't it?
Uh, yeah.
So, okay, so you were no longer really able to ride at the level you had been prior. And you had this experience where, to your point, it's often not the technical skills, but rather a cascade of unlucky dominoes that
Yeah.
impacted your diagnoses 3 times, two missed, and then the third almost missed. I would imagine that impacted quite a bit about your view of healthcare going forward.
Um, it impacted my experience of myself and my own body, but it didn't really impact my expectations of healthcare,
Oh, interesting.
which is something that I haven't really teased apart in its entirety, but it's something that I remember looking around when I was racing and looking at these other people on velodromes or wherever else, and I was sort of able to race at a relatively high level still after that 2 years and a bunch of
Hmm.
rehab. Um, but I used to think I was surrounded by superhumans. I can remember looking up a velodrome one day at a in a Kieran race at a guy, and just thinking, man, these people are so strong and brave because if they're in the pain that I'm in doing this and they're still going,
Ah,
that's just so impressive. I never really put it together that maybe there was something still holding me back. Um,
The young 16, 17-year-old boy, of course not.
yeah, of course it can't be me, right? Something's my fault.
Yeah, yeah, it's cute. And at the same time.
Um,
Okay, so here we sit. You've been through this course now. You've been exposed to the safety reforms of law, and you were kind of like, huh, this is curious. This is what law is meant to be. So what
yeah.
happened next?
What happened next was that I realized for me personally that having that understanding and some of those skills just starting to develop to understand better the dynamics, the mechanics of conflict around me, that applying them somewhere that felt meaningful and valuable was really important. And that could be any setting for different people. You know, we find sometimes it's actually just the people that we're with that make it meaningful. Sometimes it's the work. And for me, the work in law was not meeting that need. But
Ah,
working still with development cycling teams for different countries, I would get a phone call and someone would say, "Do you want to come to this tour? Um, Manage this team for, for a week or 2 weeks." And I started going away to do that, taking leave from my job,
ah,
um, and using some of these skills. And we started winning races. And the number one driver of winning races is having amazing athletes. There's no question. It's very hard to win a race without
hmm.
amazing athletes who would go on to Olympics and things like that. Um, and at the same time, I think one of the biggest factors in losing races is not having the conditions for those people to perform well. And
Okay.
so suddenly now I had a different lens and a skill set to help establish those conditions where these already amazingly talented people would perform to their best as a team.
Hmm.
And we won races all around the world. It was amazing that we shouldn't have won. You know, these big European teams coming out that we feared. You would see the European teams come out with the logos of their sponsors, and all of it said funding, professionalism, support. You know,
Yeah.
and we'd beat them because these athletes would support each other and hurt for each other, and deal with all the other challenges of hopping on a plane and flying to China and getting gastro while racing, those sorts of things. So it was really amazing to be able to use those skills over a radio into an earpiece of a team of athletes while driving a car, through the Alps, and they worked. So that
I'm
was, yeah.
hearing, I'm getting a sense that this was a really profound time for you in your journey. And I'm wondering
Yeah.
what about it was so enriching is the word I'm wanting to
Yeah.
use here for you.
I think seeing that immediate validation of
Mm,
other people's hard work. A lot of these athletes are, any athlete is training, they're investing, they're sacrificing. I worked with a lot of women's development teams, and so that's real sacrifice when the funding is not there. It's not like some of the men's professional pathways where
hmm.
there's funding and support.
Hmm.
And so to see the um, some of those victories was pretty amazing, and to play a small part in supporting those.
Hmm.
Yeah, it was good fun.
Yeah, I'm getting this. You said immediate validation, which is an interesting piece here because what I'm hearing is there's this really quick feedback loop. It worked or it didn't work, right? It's resulting in something or it's not resulting in something, and I would imagine that um, accelerates the learning as well for you as the manager, right?
It accelerates the learning, accelerates the consequences for sure. It's also a high risk environment in its own way. You've got
Mm,
120 athletes going at very high speeds through technical terrain while you're driving a car, sometimes half a meter away from them, trying to manage things and talk to them or get food out. There's a lot to manage. And at the same time, you have to be able to zoom out and think strategically what is going on. it's really important that this thing happens right now, but how does that contribute to our goal today or our goal at the end of this week?
Hmm.
So
Paul, yeah, yeah, that's good. So I'm kind of sitting here in this place where you've got your full-time job in law and you're taking leave to go and do this other thing. What was it that caused a pivot, or what happened that allowed you to make a change?
right about that time, I had been pulled into a team it was a long weekend, and I'd taken a couple of extra days either side for what was the tour of New Zealand at the time, and the team had won it. And I was starting to think, oh, this is fun. It's fulfilling. It certainly doesn't pay as well as being a lawyer. It doesn't have, the career prospects and professional cycling are not great, but it's fun and I'm young. And the firm I was at was going through a whole bunch of changes that had some restructuring going on, and they'd wanted me to stay. And they said, there's a pathway for you here.
Hmm.
Um, and I got a call from the team saying, would you like to come overseas for this next tour? And I took it, and we won that tour. Or the athletes won that tour and one of the races around it. And my heart really wasn't in it in lawyering.
Mm,
So I thought there's got to be for me personally something more meaningful. And I
hmm.
spoke to a good friend of mine who I'm still good mates with. He's probably 30 years ahead in his legal career than I am.
Hmm.
And I remember speaking to him and I said, look, I'm thinking about not lawyering for a little bit. And he looked at me and he said, go now. He said, if you've had that thought,
Mm,
then this is the time to go because it will get harder and harder and harder for you to do what you want to do.
mm.
And he said you might enjoy this, but go. So I did,
You
and
took
here we
that.
are.
And how did, you talked about your parents and their experience coming from Ireland to New Zealand and what they thought about law. Where did they factor into all of this? I know your father had already passed at this
Yeah.
point, but it might have been
Um,
in your head a little bit, I would imagine.
yeah, for sure.
Mm,
My mother, she passed away more recently, and
mm,
we were super close. Part of why I had moved back to Rotorua to become a lawyer was this was just in that period after Dad had died. Mum and Dad had been married for 42 years, and
that's
so
lovely.
it was hard. Mum was her whole life changed. Um, Good Irish Catholic family, so six kids.
Oh, good heavens.
But we were all scattered around the place, and I had the luxury, I guess, of being able to think, I'll go back. And it wasn't, Mum would never have said she needed me. I'm sure she didn't, but I
Mm,
thought it would be nice to go back and check on
mm,
her, and I ended up staying for a few years lawyering. Um, and so when I mentioned the vocational aspect of being a lawyer, people can say this person is a lawyer.
mhm.
Uh, Mum was really confused, and I remember talking to someone one day, and I had just gotten back from Tour de l'Aude, which is a really prestigious women's tour in France. Um, and someone said, "Are you still working in the bike shop?" And that was my mum, and that was how she had been able to articulate what I was doing. Was there something to do with bikes?
Okay.
Um, so she was, I think she
Oh.
was happy that I was happy, and she could see that I was doing good work. Being able to go back as with the New Zealand team to
Hmm.
Rotorua was really meaningful. That's the 20th anniversary, I think, of that in a couple of months.
Oh, wow.
We're planning something there. So it was a big change, and it was a change to not have the. I think with a vocation, you have both a title, but you also have a career mapped out for you in
Hmm.
some kind of loose terms.
Hmm.
So to choose a different path where that was not clear was exciting, but also for a long time really challenging as well.
Hmm. What was giving you the courage or inspiring or providing you the spark to take that path, Paul?
A couple of things I think are relevant there. I was lucky enough that I was able to make some of those choices.
Mm,
I'd met the right people along the way. I had um, done well enough that I could make some sacrifices. I had that ability. I wasn't in a position where I was unable to take risks.
Hmm.
Um, but at that point in my life, I think less than what was inspiring me, I was stubborn. I was really stubborn, and I had a real desire to show people that I was right or that they were wrong. I think was a big part of it, and that
Tell
was
us a little
something.
bit about more. What do you mean when you say that? They were wrong and you were right. What was important about that for you?
I think a part of it came from growing up the son of an Irish Catholic who had been through the sort of things that are not my stories to tell, um, and who wanted to set up something different for his family and his kids,
Mm-hmm.
in spite of all those challenges. And I think for a long time I had probably incorporated that in spite of, instead of some healthier ways of thinking about doing things. And it was successful for a long time, but it turns out there are other ways to do it as well. And that was where people like Ian and Werner were quite influential to be able to show that there were different strategies available in the same situations.
When you say different strategies in the same situations, can you be a little more specific? I'm curious about what
Yeah.
you're referencing.
Um, I think I became really good at finding the team that I was with, building cohesion in there, and then just fighting against everyone else until we won. And sometimes that would be on behalf of, the athletes. Sometimes it was with them. And later on, when I realized that there were ways to do that that were easier, where we could work with and around and through with a bit less friction, rather than just simply do it the hard way. That was quite helpful for me.
Yeah, interesting. What do you think was influencing that? I'm so interested in this idea that you were very clear about building cohesion inside, but then you said, I'm fighting with everybody else. What allowed you or what gave you that perspective that this cohesion inside was so important and the fighting or the advocacy or whatever, however you framed it, was equally important in that view of that age, I guess, of your day, of your journey?
Could you ask me that question again?
Yeah, I'm sort of just playing with it. Thank you. Playing with the idea myself. So it feels to me like you were very clear about this cohesion inside the team. And also it felt important for you to fight with others outside, the others around, right? What was happening there between the inside and the outside that caused your approach or influenced your approach, do you think?
I think the I think the answer to that question starts by reframing inside and outside. I think it was inside me and outside me and not the team so much.
Mm,
I think that I'd probably incorporated this real desire to protect and support
mm,
the people around me, to the probably to the exclusion signs of taking care of myself. You can
yeah.
work as much as you want in those situations. Um, and so that works really well in uncertain environments. You fly into a new country, where people don't speak the language, and you have to race the next day. That worked okay. But when you have been around a while and you're seeing the same people and the same teams and the same athletes, and then maybe changing teams, then suddenly having more stability between teams and between athletes and between situations, um, becomes important. And I'm reminded as I say that of it's a quote from Toby Carla, who was one of the psychologists at NASA, but I first heard Vernon Neff say it in this course I did before I became a lawyer, where he said if all you do is put out fires, all you're doing is training arsonists. And I think
Wow.
that in that period of my life, I was very, very good at putting out fires.
Hmm. Isn't that interesting? And all you're
Yeah.
doing is training arsonists.
Yeah.
Super interesting. I hadn't heard that quote before. That's a gift. Thank you. Um, wow. Yeah, to your point, so there was something in your experience of repeatedly seeing these athletes in these environments that the circumstances might have been changing, different team, different race, people, same riders, different team, different location, what have you. But the stability within the whole ecosystem was important as well. And that learning happened through that, I would imagine, which gives some context. That's what I'm hearing. Is this resonating for you?
Yes, and professional sport is a bubble. You can go away from your normal life. I would leave wherever I was living at the time and go away for a few months of the year
Right.
and really not have to think about anything else because you're in a different hotel a lot of the time, or you're back to a central base and you're away again. Um, but coming back to your life or to the life you left behind becomes stranger and stranger for me. And so that was part of why I stopped doing that. I started thinking
Interesting.
um, this is not really working. If I zoom out for me strategically now, is there's something missing here?
Mm, interesting. So I started to question that. Okay, so we've gotten to this point, but we still haven't gotten to healthcare. I'm trying to figure out
We haven't.
how did you make the flying leap to doing what you're doing today and working with patients and clinicians on this concept of care and healing?
There's a gap there. Yeah, there's a
Yeah,
gap.
we haven't
Um,
made that leap yet.
I had stayed in touch with Werner in New Zealand. He was based there at that point, and his wife Andrea, and had come back to Melbourne in Australia at the end of a cycling season, and was at that point toying with the idea of going back into law because it had some certainty,
Okay.
it had a pathway, and coming through professional cycling circles, there were lots of connections. There's lots of people who would have been very happy to help with that. And got back in touch with Werner at the same time, and he was in Melbourne running some courses for some corporate clients and some training.
Mm.
And I went to one of those, and I thought this is actually really speaking to the experiences that I've just had over the last few years in cycling, really being able to deal with some complicated stuff.
Hmm.
And outside of cycling as well, there was lots of other work that I would be doing to support athletes or just deal with things as they pop up. Um, and I thought this is the impact that I've been able to have with some of these skills is so meaningful. There were lots of doctors going to his workshops because they were finding the same thing as me, except they were 10, 15, 20 years into their vocations.
Hmm.
And one thing that I was really cognizant of is that whenever we say psychology, and I think the number one question when I run any kind of workshop now, within the first 5 minutes, is someone will say, "What do you mean when you say psychology?" Um,
Interesting.
it's a pretty broad um, definition that's been stretched in different ways by different approaches. I was worried that what I was seeing was not the whole picture, and I wanted to kind of validate that this was something that I could trust, that other people who would pay me could trust.
Uh,
So I did a psychology degree at that point, did a graduate diploma. That was my first piece of training there, just to really make sure, and I'm sure Werner would laugh if he heard this, but to make sure that he hadn't tricked me. That he didn't have a really good product, but that
yeah.
and it makes no sense given that I had just validated it for a number of years in these ridiculously stressful situations that clearly worked. This understanding and learning that I'd had. So I went back into the psychology degree at that point and had been approached by some organisations in Australia through various different contacts
Hmm.
to help out with some of their challenges that they were having, and coaching a couple of the CEOs as well. Yeah.
Interesting. So you had lived validation, if you will, lived experiences that validated, but you didn't have I don't want to say education, but you didn't have the academic validation. Is that what I'm hearing of these
That,
theories or ideas?
yeah, that's a good way of putting it. And I wanted that. That was important to me at that time. And I think it is important to be able to point to something bigger than me. I always begin almost every piece of work I do with new clients and say, there's an old proverb that pops up in different parts of Africa that you can trust a man who is looking for the truth, but never trust one who tells you he found it.
Mm.
And that's really a part of my ethos is I'm not selling the truth to anyone. This is not a belief system. What we're really talking about is how do we collaborate to build some new skills or a new understanding. And by going back to university, I guess I was checking, is this a belief system or is there something different going on?
Curious, what do you think um, is behind that philosophy, that worldview for you?
That's a good question. I think partly a fear of being wrong
Mm.
because a belief system, when it runs into another one, sometimes isn't so flexible.
Yeah.
I think a part of a fear of being wrong, but also just a real curiosity around how so many of the facets of these things that we talk about in any domain seem to have some commonalities.
Mm.
You
Like
know,
what? Can you expand on that for us?
well, everywhere you go, you're always there. Our mindset goes with us everywhere we go, and so whether that's me on my bike or in a professional capacity, or as a dad, as a husband, my mindset and the skills that I have to kind of support taking care of that, they're there with me,
Mm-hmm.
for good and for bad.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I love this idea that your beliefs, when they're strong and they run into a different belief, they're not so flexible. Um, so how do you handle when something is validated? So lived validation and academic validation. It sounds like there's some pretty strong validation. And you said, in your own language, you've built your life's work on proving that every interaction is an opportunity to heal. How does proving, it feels like proving is important for you somehow.
I think with proving, what I mean is people experiencing outcomes and benefits from the work that we do together. And so that's actually not me proving, it's them experiencing the proof that they create. This is not me creating it. I'm providing some tools. It's this collaborative experience.
Ah,
It's
love
I
that.
don't want to be proved. I don't want to be proved right.
Yeah,
But I definitely do not want to be proved wrong, I guess is
right.
one way. That's
Hmm.
one way of maybe thinking about it. It's important to me that I know the boundaries of what I know,
Hmm.
that I can grow those, but I can live within them as well.
It's really powerful. I can see how your past story, you're talking about a collaborative experience where you're bringing mindset, skill sets, tools for the ability to create an outcome that they're validating their own outcome through what they're creating in collaboration with you and others. I hear that would have been really powerful for you particularly in the cycling period of your life when you were managing teams.
Absolutely. There are there are so many athletes who have got data to show that they are in that tiniest fraction of a percent
Mm.
of talent in the world.
Hmm.
And then of that tiny number, there's only a minuscule number that will go on to often feel like they've been able to deliver on that.
Hmm.
And sometimes that's just luck,
Mm.
good or bad. There's so many different things that happen, but for some of them, it's also mindset
Yeah.
and the ability to to have trust and to build capability and then to create that trajectory and kind of maintain it.
Exactly. Yeah, I
Yeah.
get that. So, Paul, why healthcare today? Why are you so passionate about working particularly or specifically with clinicians and patients together in their journey? What's so important about this for you?
So coming back to those feedback loops that you mentioned earlier, those short feedback loops, there's there aren't many shorter feedback loops than what we're experiencing right now. And
Say more about that. What do you mean?
for patients and I actually should say I use the term patients really deliberately. There's different healthcare systems that might call them consumers or different things.
Mm,
Um, we can probably just substitute that out right now and just call them people.
okay.
Um, these people who are experiencing some kind of gap
Mm-hmm.
between their current health and whatever well-being means to them,
Mm-hmm.
engage with healthcare to meet that. And every single person in healthcare has got this amazing training and investment and motivation to try and help with that.
Yeah.
Um, and how they go on that journey together will dictate how that journey feels, the experiences they have, but it will also dictate the outcomes. It'll dictate where they get to. And we know that from research.
Mm-hmm.
And what we know increasingly from research at the moment is that the skills and the experience are the same for both the patient and the clinician. And so when they have those things together, the clinician's journey, their career is better, is healthier, is more satisfying, there's lower rates of burnout, they make fewer errors, they're viewed as leaders. But they also get to feel the meaning and the experience of helping others, which is
Mm.
quite different from simply providing technical care where people can say, yes, I've done a great job there, and they move on to the next chart instead of meet the next person.
Yeah. So, as you think about your experiences as a teenager with a
Yep.
broken back, and you're reflecting on your work today, doing what you do today, what would you have hoped was different for you in that situation then?
That's a great question. I One thing I don't experience doing this work is I don't particularly identify with that being a patient at that time.
Mm.
Uh, Not because I'm repressing it. I think I've worked through that.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
scar tissue is there, but the rest of it's gone. Um, the I think the meaning I find that is just dignity for people, both for clinicians and for patients, is that dignity that people can experience along the way, because that's a pretty short feedback loop too. Do I feel known or do I feel respected and supported right now in this situation?
Interesting.
Uh,
So,
which goes
oh, go ahead.
um, it goes to part of my master's research. I had the opportunity to engage with a professor in New Zealand, Mohirua, and he's a Maori professor in psychology who happened by chance to play professional rugby a few kilometers away from where my father grew up in Ireland. So we had this conversation one day where I was saying I'm very cautious not to try and conflate cultural identities here. I'm a middle-aged white guy, like this. And he said, "Well, where's your dad from?" And straight away he said, "Oh no, no, there's that dignity, that way of being there are similarities." But one of the things he talked about a lot is there's a concept in Māori culture of what's called whakamana, which means to make other people bigger, to leave other people
Mm.
bigger, not for
Mm.
yourself, not for your ego, but simply as a value of how we are together. And I
Mm.
don't directly refer to that in a lot of my work because the context is lost. But
Mm.
that idea of being able to leave other people bigger,
Yeah.
and that's through mindset and skill set, I think is really fundamental to how I would see things now.
Yeah. I can hear that. As I'm reflecting on your sharing the story of you and your father coming to New Zealand at that time with his own story around his experience with dignity. It's curious to me because there's a thread there that feels really, really important, influential in in your life's experience as a result of how it started.
There is, and I think so many of the questions you've answered that you've asked me now, we could go back and
Mhm.
insert that leaving other people bigger was
Hmm.
probably in some way what I was trying to do.
Hmm.
But also probably looking for a way to help myself feel bigger
Hmm.
because I was trying to figure out, well, who am I? Like, what's the impact I'm going to have in the world?
Right.
Uh, yeah.
Yeah.
But that sense of being made to feel smaller is absolutely one that I have a strong reaction to when I see it happen, or for myself. And I remember going back to Northern Ireland once with Dad, and being pulled over by the army because they knew who he was, and rifle butts or rifle barrels on the windows and screaming and all that kind
Must
of
have been
stuff,
terrifying.
just purely to intimidate us. They're not going to do anything to a 12-year-old with a New Zealand passport. That's was a different time, but that sense of feeling smaller is absolutely something that I think we can that undermines healing. It undermines
Absolutely.
careers from the
It
outset.
Right? Yeah. And I'm feeling really touched by this because I feel like it's the seed of the whole thing.
Yeah.
This idea of dignity and making people feel bigger or making people bigger.
And
Something there.
for healthcare, we can tease that apart from outcomes because that's one of the most challenging things in healthcare, which is that you can't always change the outcome.
Yeah.
And for a lot of clinicians, when they meet someone, they know that that may not be possible or that option is now no longer available.
Hmm.
Um, but what they can contribute to is the experience of trust and dignity and growth along the way.
Yeah.
Has ripple effects that are often pretty um, hard to predict.
Hmm.
But the ones
Hmm.
that we can measure and predict, we know are transformative for those people, for their families, for the people around them, but also for the clinicians and the healthcare system itself.
Absolutely. And we're right coming back to every single interaction has the power to heal.
Yeah,
And the healing is related to, as I'm hearing it, not just health, but well-being and dignity.
absolutely. And
Mm.
occasionally there's a cheeky asterisk that pops up by every interaction because we don't get every interaction right. We can't be perfect. And I think
Right.
that feeling of a need to be perfect can really undermine a lot of healthcare. But those ones that we get wrong have the power to heal as well, because what we do next really matters. And some
Mm.
of the most transformative outcomes that we've had in engaging with clinicians or with teams is how something that didn't go so well is made right in a way that creates a whole better future
Yeah,
where
exactly.
trust is strengthened, where we're moving away from a mitigation way of looking at things or a management point of view and thinking actually,
Hmm.
well, what can we do to transform this?
Right. Amazing. We've covered a lot of really interesting territory in this conversation, Paul.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of little really juicy nuggets in here. As we're winding up and you're reflecting on this conversation and your story, where would you like it to go? Share with us your vision of your hope for the future.
So I'm at a really interesting point where after training hundreds of surgeons and anaesthetists primarily through the colleges here in Australasia, and also working with some really amazing patient advocacy groups.
Mm.
I was left with this dissatisfaction with the training that was out there. The research and the science is great. Um,
Mm.
there is a really good understanding about what can transform these things, but not a lot of situations where that's been brought together with the actual lived experience of the clinicians and the patients and and mindset and skills.
Mm,
So a week ago, we began rolling out globally a new curriculum for changing that. And the feedback so far has been amazing.
mm,
I've been talking to the hospitals and surgeons, and it seems to be really ringing a bell. So where I want it to go is to see the impact of that leave as many people as possible bigger.
mm. Leave people bigger. Beautiful. I love it. Really important work. Thank you for sharing with us. For those people who want to follow along your journey and perhaps learn more about the work you're doing and how to leave people bigger, Paul, where might they find you?
They will find me primarily through 700 Healthcare. So 700.
Okay.
You can find that at 700.consulting or 700.healthcare.
Okay.
Um, they'll find me on LinkedIn, and would really love to hear from anyone where this might ring a bell.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to learn more about you too.
It's
Okay.
been a real pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye for now.